You're in trouble.
Okay, so we should pay attention now.
We have some guests, Mary Francis, and Tom Wheeler are here from Memphis. Tom has visited us before. He has a couple of software books that will take you around London and show you all the sites that Sherlock Holmes visited. So we're glad to have them here today. We also have Arthur Williams, and he is with Tom and Anita visiting. I don't see anybody else that's visiting today. But, oh, yes, I'm sorry. Your name is? Katrina. You're helping Brother Dave today, are you? Okay, well, I appreciate it. I'm going to close these doors here. So I'm a little anxious about our speaker. We may not have a speaker today. I haven't heard from him.
Could be a new mystery.
Yeah. I was in San Antonio this weekend and flew him home last night. And we've not been in touch, so we'll see how it goes. But anyway, if you have show and tell, we'll be glad to show us and tell us about it.
Does he have like a cell phone that we can call him and?
I don't have a number for him.
Oh, okay.
I
Maybe he
just
lost his
emailed.
try to find it or something.
Yeah, I have an email, but I don't know. I think he'll
How
probably show.
about the original document in the,
One second, please, Dave. Hang on just a
Hold on,
second.
Dave.
oh, you got something, go ahead.
No, can you folks on Zoom hear okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
But I have my sound up high, so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Go ahead, Dave.
This is the document that tells about Sir Hugo Baskerville's run-in with the original Hound. And one member, I won't embarrass him by saying who, one member said, is this a copy of the original? And I had to point out to him that the Hound is a work of fiction. Anyway,
Says who?
Yeah, just a minute.
Wait a minute.
This is a very interesting document.
Where did you come up with that?
Pardon me?
Where did you come up with that?
I think I bought that off eBay.
Wow. Okay. I have a book here that some of you have heard about recently. Andrew Lysette is an author and writes some fiction and stuff like that, but he has a book out that has lots of pictures about London. It follows Doyle through his life, and it's a wonderful nice addition to, you know, it's not a novel or anything, but I like these kind of books. It's all the homes that are in here. And it's called The Worlds of Sherlock Holmes, the inspiration behind the world's greatest detective. So, as you know, Doyle put actual events into his stories or wrote them about those. So this is where a lot of that inspiration came from. So that's what I said.
Lysette wrote a biography of Doyle, didn't he? About 15 years ago.
Yeah. Anybody else have a show and tell? Drew has a really neat one here. We're gonna see that. I'm about, that's cool.
So, excuse me, in the latest Bloods and Doddles, which just came out, Jim wrote about some books that he has, and he just picked up The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes.
We still got the other one.
This is a first edition, and it's 1933, uncut, which means when they publish books, it comes off the printer and they put it together, they have to cut the pages so you can open it and read it. And some of them stick together, and that's what I have. So it's unread. And then the first paperback edition of the same book, but he made some changes in this. In the original, he said, no greater Sherlockian actor can be imagined on the screen than Arthur Wantner. And at the time of this writing, he had been in 2 films. And he had the hopes that he would be in more. Now he's been in 5, but we have 4. And Dean has the whole, I think, reformatted edition.
Yeah, well, a few of them, just, they restored. So the best copies that I've seen, they're not the budget
public
Yeah.
domain copy.
Thank you, Tom.
But one of those is called the missing Rembrandt is actually the missing Sherlock too. It's considered a lost film. But the other four, the main impression about Wagner was he looks just like the Sidney Paget drawings.
He did, yeah.
It's incredible.
I love it. I love his work. So,
Wasn't he Doyle's favorite poems? Did he say
No, that was Alan Norwood.
yeah.
Norwood, yeah.
Norwood.
Doyle had died by the time Wagner
Okay,
started.
all right, thank
So the one change from this edition to this one is I found a passage that has exactly the same word describing the greatest actor on screen, but he replaces Arthur Wagner. He needs to is he had written a pastiche which he had privately published and distributed among friends. Very hard to find.
You got the Hamlet?
The Hamlet, the
Yeah.
adventure of the unique Hamlet.
You need
That was added to the first paperback edition.
Oh,
And
that's
then Otto Penzler does a terrific library. I think there are 8 or 10 books in it so far. And yeah, he reprinted the book, but his reprint is the first edition. So if you want, and it's very hard to find these books, but I'd recommend if you're interested in finding that. So since it's that edition reprint, it doesn't have the Hamlet. But Otto Penzler also published, Vincent Starrett had picked up some other articles by other writers, and the Hamlet is in here.
That's the 221. B.
221B, Studies in Sherlock Holmes by Vincent Starrett. So if anybody wants to look at these after you clean your hands.
There
up,
they are.
Here,
Yeah, right.
smart.
Can I
you're
hear?
welcome to it.
Yeah, I hear some.
There's a man who has a website and it's called Studies in Starrett. And Vincent Starrett is the hero of that. And it's Ray Betzner, who now lives in Williamsburg, Virginia. He moved down there to be with their granddaughter and his son, Jason. But Ray's a good friend, and on one of his stories, he tells about Vincent Starrett, who was born in Toronto, and he's a newspaper man, and he wrote books and poems and all kinds of things. And Vincent's Ray Betzner has a copy of everything he wrote. In fact, he has the onion skin of 221B, which is the most famous poem about Sherlock Holmes, I guess, ever written, that Starrett typed on his typewriter and sent the original away, and he had the copy left, and Betzner has that. But one thing that I can't get the two guys separated, that Vincent Starrett always told was that he was born in Toronto, and when the doctor delivered him, he thought he was stillborn. So he wrapped him in newsprint and put him to the side of the bed or under the bed. And another friend came by and he said, well, let me see that baby. What's with it? He pulled him out and spanked him, and he was fine. So he challenged all his writer friends to tell him that nobody was in print before me. It's a great Sherlock Holmes story.
His autobiography was titled Born in a Bookshop.
Is this our guy?
Oh,
Not him.
okay.
Hold up. Don't know what to do. Yes,
Oh, sorry.
you want? Oh, okay, good.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, anybody else have show and tell? We have show and tell. Oh, I'm sorry, you go ahead.
Yeah.
That's great. What you got?
I have a few items. The first is a tell. So in October, Donnie Zalden from Canada met with my students over Zoom and taught them about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's first tale,
Did you warn them?
Tiger Tale. It was fabulous though. So in several instances, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, when he was interviewed later in life, would talk about his first story and how it was about a tiger. And a fragment of that story is actually in existence. And so Donnie shared with the students the 36 words that we know are a part of that story. And then encouraged the students to finish the tale. So they're in the midst of that, and it was a fabulous experience. And then I see Gail's with us. And Gail, during one of the first years that I became a Nashville scholar, gave me a bag of treasures. And this box was in the bag of treasures. So I'm going to pass it around and let everyone take a look at the treasure Gail gave me years ago, because it relates to today's story. So at some point, hopefully, Gail, we can get it on camera for you.
You think that'll be in the box when it gets back to you?
I hope, because I don't think anybody needs a third one.
Well, let's see what guests we have. We have Steve Mason from the cruise, the Barclone Star. David Hayes is with us. Gail Stahl is with us. Gail, wave at us. Can you hear me?
Hey, hello.
Gail can hear. Everybody can. And Joe Eckert from St. Louis or somewhere up there, right?
Yeah,
And then who's at the bottom there? Anybody know that person? I can't. Is that Will Watt?
Yeah.
Willie boy, good to see you, brother.
hey, Jim.
And who's top right? Who is that?
And
Yeah.
Kimbrough.
Yeah,
Oh,
and
yeah.
Kimbrough.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is great. And Esmeralda, Sandy Cozen from New Jersey. Sandy, do you have a limerick for us today? I think you're
What do I
muted.
do? Do I look as if I've lost my memory? A memory of like what?
Limerick, Sandy.
A limerick. Oh, okay. Somebody remind. Let me think. I have it.
Cardboard box.
Cardboard box. Okay. I just have to pull it up. For some reason, I did not.
He's working on
Take
it.
me a minute. Take me a minute. Somebody say something.
Just a minute.
You'll find it.
It's been a
We're
crazy.
stalling.
It's been a bit of a crazy month for me, so it's an old computer. It takes a second to pull it up.
Turn down there.
Jim, I think Tom Hood was trying to attract your attention.
Let's see if I can turn it up.
Were you trying to say something and go and try to get that finger on?
Well, I just.
Oh, wait, we're
I have
on
a few
cardboard box, right?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. A sailor's wife cried her dear mister was drinking because of her sister. When a friend brought her cheer, both of them lost an ear and their lives. Then the sailor, he missed her.
Thank you.
Sorry, I usually have this all ready to read, but as I said, it's been a crazy couple of weeks for me. Hello?
Hello.
Anybody out there? Have we lost them?
Okay.
Guess
Sure,
we're
yeah.
lost.
Now,
Yeah, I
now
don't see
speak,
the,
please.
Now we got it. There we go.
It disappeared into the mist.
Here we go.
Okay, Sandy, try it again, my dear.
oh, I know I have to get up again. Sorry.
Well, we didn't have the sound up. I'm sorry. We're not real technical here today.
Well, neither am I. So,
Bring it
so
up.
all is suitable. Okay, just a second. I'm on the page. I just have to scroll down to it. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. A sailor's wife cried. Her dear mister was drinking because of her sister. When a friend brought her cheer, both of them lost an ear. And their lives, then the sailor, he missed her.
Yay, good,
That's good.
very good.
Okay, you heard that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, we got it. Thank
Okay.
you. Great.
You got it.
Any other show and tell? Yes, sir. This is Tom Wheeler, everyone, from Memphis. And his wife, Mary Jane, Mary Francis, sorry.
Mary Francis and I, back in the early '80s, made our first overseas trip to visit my brother, who was stationed with the Air Force outside of London. And we fell in love with London, and from then on, for about 20 years, we would go over once or twice a year. So, and I was always a Sherlock Holmes fan, so I decided to start trying to find places in London associated with Sherlock Holmes. So I gathered 100 sites, then 200, then 300. Finally, I gathered what I thought was all of the sites, 400 sites.
Wow.
And I published under the name Thomas Bruce Wheeler. I used my full name, just like Mary Francis did. So anyway.
Yay. Here he comes. Go ahead, Tom. Come on in, John.
Here, Thomas.
Right here, brother.
Through my friends in the Sherlock Holmes Society in London,
Here, I'll put a chair.
they had a publisher contact me. My first trip on the London Sherlock Holmes. Since then, I've republished it myself. I have a LLC called London Secrets. And it's published under on Amazon. How many here have seen my website on Sherlock Holmes?
And I've used it in my classroom
We started.
with my students.
Okay. Anyway,
That's fine. Yeah, that's good. Good.
here's my latest book. I changed it to be the map one. Because there's a problem. I'm not the first one to do this kind of, right, on Sherlock. But the problem is that if you're sitting in Nashville or Memphis, you want to see it by either the adventure in which the site is mentioned, or you want to see them sorted by the tube stations. So that if you ever go to London, you know what's around that station.
Right.
The problem is, you need a map in conjunction with this to make it work. So I created a website.
Ah,
Nice.
Now, if you go to the website, you'll see this static map on the site. But with all these, the problems with a map is, if you have a map of Sherlock's London, you've got to have little tags to tell what these places are, which you don't know. But so on this map, on the website, can be converted to an interactive map. If you take your mouse arrow and click on this map, it converts to an interactive map. Now you can move the site around Greater London, north, south, east, west. And if you click with your mouse arrow on one of these sites, up comes a text box that explains when that happened, what happened there, and what adventure, and it explains the whole site much better than just a little tag.
yeah.
Wow. Now, I ask how many have seen this, because when you go to the interactive map on the website, there's a counter that shows how many people have visited that site. Last time I'm blind, by the way. What? So I haven't checked recently, but the last time I checked, it was 600,000 on its way to a million.
Nice.
So it's Sherlock's London, no spaces, no punctuation marks.com.
Great.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
That's a big.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Think about, I'll pass this around. And they look at it. Okay, how you go? Okay. On the back of your sheet in front of you is the word about John Besser. Unfortunately, there's nothing about Susan, his wife, but she came today, and that's why. Susan sings in our choir at the Emmanuel Baptist Church. And John is not a musician, he's everything else, but so if you look at that sheet, you'll read about him. One of his really important missions in life was to work with the Habitat for Humanity. And so when I told Billy that we need to make John Besser a member of our club and give him a name, he said, that's easy, Norwood Builder. I said, oh, yeah. So we're gonna do him in December. There you go. So John Besser, Professor Besser, as he's known. We're glad you're here. I think they got the time wrong or something, but
Yeah.
I've been having a heart attack now. It's beating again. And we're good.
That
Do we need to-
coffee didn't kick in, and so I thought it was 11:30. So we have our son visiting from St. Louis.
Oh, my God.
And
That's okay.
so that's crazy. So thank you for having me here. I'm a novice, so I may come from a different perspective, but I hope to share with you the cardboard box. And
There it is.
there it is.
Whoa.
There it is, the cardboard box. It's amazing. So
You're actually gonna be on this,
Oh.
so back up a little bit.
back up.
Yeah, if you stay at the table, pretty much.
Well, I wonder.
You want-
That's all right. Wonder if you want.
I'm a wanderer. Yeah. So cardboard box is a very interesting story. I found that it has several unique aspects that really popped out at me. One, around the main story is one man and three sisters. And that combination is always chaos.
Mhm.
Another one is, this is probably the goriest of any story, any Sherlock Holmes adventure. It's definitely, at the same time, I find that this presents Sherlock in, I would say, his most human and also his most philosophical as well. And I'll touch on that. And the fourth item that really struck me was, it's also one of his most controversial in several aspects. The first aspect of the controversy is Arthur Conan Doyle pulled this story from being published. And there really wasn't any really good explanation of it. He said that in the story, the illicit love affair, and the way he presented it, and he had said here, and it's the first time I've ever saw this, was that he wrote his stories for young boys. And that was another reason. At the same time, none of his biographers ever made a comment about the story being pulled or any of the controversy about why that may have happened. And then lastly, the other controversy is in the time when the story was told, the first couple of paragraphs became the lead paragraphs in another story. And so it's quite interesting. That was in The Resident Patient. So I went back and looked, and it's pretty much word for word in The Resident Patient, and it's still there in both. It's sort of strange to see it, because you don't see that. So there's a lot of controversy around this particular story. So with that being said, it was first published in January 1893 in the Strand magazine as part of one of 12 stories. It was published in the United States on January 14th of that same year in Harper's. About a year later, Harper's came out with the memoirs, the 12 stories. And very shortly after that, this is when then Arthur Conan Doyle pulled the story. And there was another edition of Harper's that only had 11 stories in it of the memoirs. And so that first edition, whether it's 12, is a very rare edition. If you can find one of those, it's quite rare. Yeah, so it was that's where it was only mentioned that an author Bartlett Maurice had an article in 1908 in Collier's magazine that talked about the possibility of the reasons why that Arthur Conan Doyle told the story. And that's where he surmises the story was too risque for young readers, and even went so far as to say sensitive readers, I think was the word he used in the early 1890s, that the way he presented the story was, he may have gone too far. What he was saying, but it's so odd again that in all of the biographies of Arthur Conan Doyle, no one ever mentions the controversy about pulling the story. You know, really, very rarely any reasoning behind the story being changed and altered. Exclusively in later years as part of the whole memoir series. So there isn't any that I could see the reasoning behind that. The story also has 8 Sidney Paget illustrations, and we'll get to see those today. So I'll go through the story briefly here, and then I'd like to finish up with what I call an addition to some of my thinking here about it. So if you go to the next slide.
Watch the screen, everyone.
Yeah, so this is the very first slide. The story starts as most Conan Doyle Sherlock stories begin. That they're in the Baker Street rooms, and they say they're in a brown. What was it?
Brown study.
Brown study. Thank you. I was going to say funk. That's my word. But they're in a brown study, which means they're in a depressed mode. Nothing's happening. There isn't anything that he's working on, and this is where I think one of the few times we get an opportunity to see inside Sherlock's, because those next paragraphs, Sherlock shows his powers of observation by reading Watson's mind, by just looking at his eyes, just watching his eyes. It's totally amazing. And so, next slide. So, I don't know if you can see this. I didn't do a very good job of that, but it's sideways. If you all lean sideways, see. So at the top of the stairs is the general, and it's its last stand. And this is what Sherlock is reading. Watson's mind he's in this brown funk. You can see, if you recall the first slide, he sort of sits back and slumped in his chair. And then Watson's eyes move to a recent photograph of the general, and now Sherlock surmises he has fond memories. So this whole first part of it is really, I think, started showing a little bit of the human side of Sherlock. You don't usually see this very often in the stories, and so this is part of the human side. I think that begins to show up. Yeah, and so it's a fascinating thing, because I looked at a few other stories that are some of my favorites, and you don't see this hardly ever, where Sherlock goes into this detail of the explanation, and he draws Watson into the story of reading his mind. And then, as most of the stories, then we immediately fall into, here's an article in the paper, and he needs to go figure this out. It's his friend Lestrade who's, okay, now it's a mystery of this box, if you will, please. Then the box arrives, and they're sideways. How in the world did I get this?
Can you shift?
He can fix that.
Rotate there? Put him in right side up. Well, he's sitting there with his cushion. And we had talked with Lestrade about, let's go see him. The box, as reported, had some human ears, and Miss Cushing wouldn't allow the box in her house, so it was in the outhouse. And when I looked up outhouse and kept reading it, her outhouse was a garden shed, really, not an outhouse.
There was no half moon.
There was no half, exactly.
Catalog.
So he is speaking with her, and she says, I don't allow that in the house. And so it's out in the outhouse, and he goes out there after speaking with her about, and her name is Susan, Miss Susan Cushing.
There you go.
Right. Yeah. And so the next sideways slide, please. Yeah. So he goes out and examines the ears, and this is the first thing he sees is the box, and it is a box so wrapped, brown paper, which has the telltale sign to Sherlock of a coffee, which indicates to him some of the provenance of the box. And he noticed the postings, and he also noticed that Miss Cushing did not untie the knots. She cut them with scissors, and so he could see the knots, and the knots were a sailor knot. And sure enough, we have here 2 sailor knots.
Sailor knots.
Impressive. Well done.
My son did it. Thank you, Joe.
May I ask a question?
Sir,
We're never told why the box smells of coffee.
right. Well, the implication is that the ship, if it was a sailor, that the ship was delivering coffee beans. And so I think you're led to surmise on your own that the sailor was on a ship that had coffee, because then he follows the next couple of paragraphs, follows this ship where it could be to the port where the box was posted from. And it was a port. And so I think you're led to surmise that the ship was a ship carrying coffee from port A to port B, and therefore it had that smell. He also notes that right after that is that the rope smelled of the sea. And I don't know, I've never smelled rope that much, but it's I imagine, Sherlock has extraordinary properties of sight and observation that he probably picked that up. But that was my surmising, and I think he sort of leads you as he does on a number of stories where he gives you a bit of information and sort of leaves it there for you to say, where do the dots connect, and then how he goes forward. That's my thought, but I could be wrong. Anybody have any other information about that? We're welcome. Yeah. So here, where he's examining the years, you also see his medical training come into play, because he talks very specifically about the shape of the ear, the flat part of the ear, that every ear is different. I mean, I didn't know that. I mean, I think that's true. But so he really goes into that detail. And then after that, he goes back and sees Miss Cushing again. He observes a photograph quite innocently, by passing by. He sees a photograph on the mantle, and he makes a statement. I see you have two sisters, and she's, almost appalled. How do you know that? So now we start to see the story that is beginning to develop. I think that Sherlock is putting together. The further part of the story as we go forward, if you would have the next slide, sir. So as the story develops, Mr. Browning, the man here in the story, originally came to visit Miss Susan. But I think on the second visit, he was enamored more by Miss Mary. The fact, yes. And so he, as the annotation says, dumped Miss Susan and actually marries Miss Mary. And so the third sister, the youngest sister, Miss Sarah, notice the first initial S, Miss Susan and Sarah. Miss Sarah just is taken, you are led to believe, with the life that Mr. Browning and her sister have. And so she finagles a way to go and live with them. And during that time, we have this scene where she is attracted to Mr. Browning. And Mr. Browning comes in one afternoon from a visit on the boat, and Miss Mary is out running errands, and Miss Sarah says, "Why are you so upset that Miss Mary's not here? I'm here," and showed his hand, and she pretty much flirts with him, and he gets flustered and sort of ignores her and leaves. Yes, and so Miss Sarah now is upset, and she's so upset that over the next time period, she begins to put ideas in Miss Mary's mind that Mr. Browning is fooling around as he travels on his ship up and down the coast. It's so much so that one of the friends that visiting, and I think his name is Alec Fairburn, is attracted to Miss Mary, while she thinks Mr. Browning is out gallivanting. She thinks that she might do the same. So they begin to have a more serious relationship. And so after some period of time, it doesn't say how long, but Mr. Fairburn comes to visit Miss Mary, and Miss Sarah has already moved out from living with her sister Mary, and Mr. Fairburn takes Miss Mary out along the train to go to the coast and spend an afternoon, and Mr. Browning, ever so suspicious, follows them. It's at this time that Browner,
That's okay.
and so, at this point, the happy, couple go out on a boat in somewhat of a fog and mist, and Mr. Jim follows them, and this is where he catches up to them, and, the next slide, I think, will show Mr. Jim. No, there it is. There's actually the scene of Mr. Brown, who has, as explained very early on, has somewhat of a seaman's temper.
Oh,
Yes, and there he is in the act of bashing Mr. Fairburn, who's also a sailor, is an officer, in fact. And there's Miss Mary, and he ends up bashing both of them. And
pretty gruesome.
yes, well, the gruesome part comes next.
Oh.
The bashing was the gruesome, as it's shown here. But in his rage, he recalled that he had told Miss Sarah something, that if he ever caught Miss Mary messing around, if you will, that he would cut off their ears and send them to him. And sure enough, that's what he does. And so that's the cardboard box. It arrives with the ears salted down.
Mhm.
And our friend Lestrade believes, from the story from Miss Susan, that the perpetrators of this hoax, bad joke, if you will, was some former medical students that she had to kick out. And Sherlock pretty quickly says that's not the case. These are fresh ears. Right.
Almost like a man.
Right.
Yes.
This is where it gets a little gory. It talks about, the chemicals they're using at the time to preserve, early embalming. It talks about some alcohols. And so anyway, that he surmises that it's a novice who salted them down. And sure enough, he leads you to believe the sailor is familiar with salted the meats and so forth, and he leads you down that path, and sure enough, the interesting part here, which is somewhat confusing a little bit, is he mailed the ears in the brown paper to Miss S. Cushing. Right, and so that's what Miss Susan got it at her address. But Mr. Browner had not realized that Miss Sarah Cushing did not go back to live with her sister, but she had a new address. And so he was intending the pageant to go to Miss Sarah instead of Miss Susan. And Miss Susan, of course, from the very beginning, is, I don't know what they're talking about. Why would this come to me? So it goes on into that. So
There's another story of which sailor knots
yeah,
figure pretty impressively, that
Yeah.
Holmes used that. Does anybody remember what that was? I reported on the story and I can't think of it.
Black Peter?
No.
No.
Fun? I have to look at our setup here. That's all. Yeah, hang on.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
okay, so one of the last slides here is Sherlock has put this on case. And he blah 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 1, 2, 3. It was this way. Lestrade, you're a big dummy. In so many words.
If you'll just lend me your ears.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so Mr. Browner was very upset. He was very upset. And he hadn't been able to sleep since he did the bashing. And so he willingly gets the handcuffs and is taken away. Here at the very end, I think, I can't recall of another spot that Holmes is so philosophical. And he's sitting there later in the day drinking their tea, and he says, Watson, what does all this mean? What this evil? What does this mean to us? And he goes on a sentence or two talking about the revenge and the evil of the revenge of this, the sister being jealous of the other sister and sort of tying that together as evil. And I don't recall in one story to see a human side of Sherlock at the beginning, and then this philosophical side, which also I think brings out the human side of him, of a caring person. He's always presented as cold, mechanical, very systematic. Even in the mind reading of Watson, in the second, third paragraph, he's very aloof, if you will, about how obvious his observations are and how clear they are. So I think this story really has a lot of different aspects of Arthur Conan Doyle and how his writings come together. And when we look back, this was fairly early in his writing career. 1893.
1893.
Yeah, 1893 was published. It was written in 1888 and published in 1893. Yeah. So I find it quite unique.
The story I was trying to remember is Abbey Grange.
Ah,
The person is tied to a chair and
yes.
it's great or not all over again. He often used the same material here in different ways.
Recycled.
Yeah, there you go. Why
Recycle,
not?
right? We didn't want to use up all the
It's a
words.
good plan, so why not use it again?
So that I think it's a very interesting story when you look at the entirety of how Arthur Conan Doyle brought Sherlock at this early part in his writing career, and he, I don't think, I could be wrong here, that he ever revisits Sherlock as philosophical as he is in that very last paragraph. He does have some moments, but I don't think he asks the questions of the readers and such in this way ever again. And that's, I would have to look at some more.
There's a sort of philosophical view at the end of his last vow.
Yes, I was that.
There's an east wind coming.
Yes.
It's talking about political developments.
You're right.
But there's a philosophical element to that.
Yeah. That's interesting. I'll have to go look at that. So one other thing that I will call is, I'm gonna change subjects just a touch here. One of the things when I call this is my add-on, I went down a rabbit hole. So when we say Sherlock Holmes, the vision that comes into my mind is a gentleman sitting there in a profile view, smoking a pipe. But as I read this story, somewhere around the fourth paragraph, he says, "We can't leave, Watson, until I get my cigar case."
Oh, okay.
And I said, "What?" And so the rabbit hole I went down in is I wanted to know how many stories that he actually smoked a pipe or the pipe was mentioned, or what other devices that might come up. And I thought this was really odd. Only 60 stories mention a pipe. About 20% of the stories mention cigarettes. 10% mention cigars. So this is one of the very few stories where he is packing up his cigars and taking them along with him. there's about 20% of the stories, there's no mention of anything. There is one mention of snuff, one mention of cocaine, and we know that there's implications in several of the early stories about that. And I have it written down by the Adventures, the Memoirs, the Return, the Last Bow, and the Casebook. And except for the Last Bow series, which has 0 mentions of pipe. All the other ones, about half of the stories, the pipe is mentioned. That he's, and I noticed we've got the 3-pipe solution.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was interesting. Yes, ma'am.
So in the 10% of stories that include a mention of cigars, how many of those cigars are smoked by Sherlock Holmes? Because when I read the story too, I was like,
Yeah.
he's collecting his or packing his cigar box.
Yeah.
I had never really thought of Sherlock Holmes and a cigar.
Right. Well, that was my
Yeah.
thought. I said,
Yeah,
what? Well, I quickly scanned all 60
yeah.
in order to
Bless you.
Jim said I would get lost in the minutia and
Uh-huh, it happened.
Oh, we love rabbit holes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
so I thought that was interesting. I don't know if I can answer your question,
okay.
but most all of them, it was referred to that he was smoking a cigar or
Really?
he was sitting in the chair in the corner with his cigar. And that's how I pulled it together.
Yeah.
Yeah, so but to
Okay.
me, it's just like ruined the whole image that I have of him sitting with that big, that big old, there's a name for that guy.
Calabash?
Earshot.
Yeah, burst, yeah, yeah, that big old pipe.
I don't think a cigar helps you think like a pipe does. You know, you go, but you go like that.
Yeah, well, I don't know, I've never indulged in tobacco. I have enough other.
Mentioning the crooked man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The cigar case mentioning the crooked man.
Yes, we had that recently too, didn't we?
The guy went back for his cigar case and
Yeah,
saw this argument between the two.
right. So this is, I thought fascinating, just bit of minutia. While I was doing that, I also ran across the thing that, in the 60 stories presented, 45 had crimes in it. 6, there was no crime committed, but because Sherlock stopped the crime before it was committed. And that left, there were 9 that no crimes were mentioned. They were some other missing jewel inside a house, or thing about they call it,
Story gimmick.
yes, yeah, there you go. So he had other things going on in those other 9, but so that's it. So I'm not going to open the box.
Oh, good, thank you.
Yeah,
If they're on salt,
yeah,
they'll keep for a while.
yeah.
Wouldn't you think the
Pickles.
smell of tobacco would overpower the smell of coffee? Huh?
Well, I thought about that, but I think if we look at the chemistry of the coffee, it is a much more pungent and aromatic compounds that stay around. The tobacco dissipates, and unless you're in a place where there's a lot of smoke from the tobacco that accumulates, and it has to be smoked. If it's just raw tobacco, you don't get quite the same kind of effect. Whereas in coffee, because it's an aromatic, it's an ester, that means anything to you, but it has a smell that is always coming off of the bean. Whereas the tobacco leaf is dried, nothing comes off of it until you actually burn it. You get the combustion products.
Good.
Next time, Professor, I think you need to bring some labs for us to.
Oh,
when it comes to all of that. I'm like,
We have a couple labs that'll blow your mind.
okay, I'm in.
I have, go ahead, Phil, go ahead.
Are you done? I don't.
Yeah, I'm done. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah.
My observations about this story, and as Professor Besser had said, it's different from every other Sherlock Holmes story. It's very grim, it's very dark. It's set also a domestic setting. And I think we have to look at Conan Doyle's life and literary career at the time to understand why he might have written this at that time. As you said, it was set in 1888, but it's written in 1893. And a year earlier, he had published a domestic story called Beyond the City, An Idol of the Suburbs. I don't know if anybody's read that or not. If you're interested at all in feminist characters in Victorian literature, it has one of the greatest ever, Mrs. Westcott, who is a cigar-smoking, pantaloon-wearing, tennis-playing woman. She is a female Professor Challenger, and I would certainly recommend the book. It's good, and that book opens up with two little ladies, two sisters, living in a little suburban setting, peering out their windows and being nebbers, as Browner said. And Browner, I think, is not an accidental name. We talked about the Brown Funk, and I think that's a psychological connection on Conan Doyle's part. But what was going on in Conan Doyle's life? Well, in 1893, in January of 1893, when this story was published, his father had been committed. And his
Mhm. Can anybody hear me?
1893.
Oh,
So,
here we go.
Yes, he was frozen. He's frozen, they're frozen.
time with
Okay.
his father being institutionalized for all these problems that the family has dealt with all this time. So, yeah, and of course, as you say, he took it out of his collected memoirs and put it into his last bow later on. The original of Resident Patient didn't have that segment transported. That was done during the collection of the stories, actually by the publishers, more than by Conan Doyle. And so, I guess by the time his last bout came out many years later, as a collection of stories, subtitled The Reminiscences, that he had relented on wanting to get that story anthologized with his others. So I think if you look at what's going on with Conan Doyle's life, his literature at the time, it explains a lot about why this weird tale, right after Silver Blaze, the next tale after Silver Blaze, which is one of the greatest, and this is on nobody's list of favorite stories. Maybe Hannibal Lecter's, but nobody else.
Good. Was Doyle's first wife ill at that point?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Because that's what I was thinking, and had brought in a caretaker for her, the nurse, and the relationship developed between Doyle and the nurse, who became his second wife eventually. And so this was in the early stages of that, but I wonder if that might also have been an issue.
Very, very well.
That reflecting something in his life, he didn't want that to be, exposed.
There are two American expressions used in this story. In the early days of marriage and Jim's marriage, he said they were getting on well, just as bright as a new silver dollar. I thought that was an unusual term for an Englishman to be. And then later on, he talks when he's all upset, he compares his feeling to Niagara. Yeah, again, not something that you think of an Englishman saying.
I think there's a plot flaw. Sorry. Well, I think there's a plot flaw that you have to go with to accept for the story. The S, Cushing, Sarah and Susan. If the guy knew that both were living in the same house, he would have specified which one he wanted it to go to be sure that the right one opened it.
Right.
Just the fact that she moved out wasn't enough of an explanation. So
Well,
that doesn't make sense.
Compare this to the fact that Sidney Paget did the illustrations for the stories. The letter that came to the Paget house was for his brother. And Sidney read it and said, "Hey, I can get me a job here," So Sidney Paget became the illustrator for the stories instead of his brother, but he made it up to him because he drew Sherlock Holmes as his brother, so I thought that's kind of cool. Now, there's one great connection for me in this story, and that is a couple of years ago, they came to me from the BSI books and said, we're gonna redo Sherlock Holmes in music. And we want you to write about the Stradivarius. And Dean and I, he helped me edit that and we sent it in and it's been pretty popular, but I was to write about not how he played the violin, but where the violin came from. Was it truly a Stradivarius? And so you have in this, we had a pleasant little meal together. This is Holmes and Watson, during which Holmes would talk about nothing but violins, narrating with great exultation how he had purchased his own Stradivarius, which was worth at least 500 guineas, at a Jew broker's in Tottenham Court Road for 55 shillings. This led him to Paganini, and we sat for over an hour over a bottle of claret, with which he told me anecdote after anecdote of that extraordinary man. That afternoon was far advanced, and the hot glare had softened into a mellow glow before we found ourselves at the police station, and Lestrade was waiting for us at the door. But there's a young lady in Wales that had written a story about that the Stradivarius was not a true Stradivarius. Holmes had been duped. I turned that around and said, oh, it definitely was a Stradivarius, and Holmes duped the broker because he paid his price. The guy had really for a low price. And I went on with the story about why you knew it was a Stradivarius for various reasons. But this has always been one of my favorite stories just because of the connection for that. John, thank you so much. Okay, Arthur, yes.
Two things.
Okay.
If you're in Nashville, William Stein violin is my son.
Oh, really?
Almost every violin made has a label in it that says Stradivarius.
But.
And if you could be duped from, but I don't think he would be. The other thing, comment, which gets off the subject just a little bit, but stays with it, are these ears. I'm a sculptor, and for the better part of a year, I studied portraits. I was going to change of vein thoughts. I was in Hurricane Katrina, so none of my work ever came out. It got lost at that time dealing with that. But along the way, I spent a long time with ears. I'm going to tell you right now that in this room, there were no two ears except from the same person alike. They're just not alike. In the late 60s, they were accepted as a form of fingerprint. And they're on par with fingerprints in some places. Wow. If you have a picture of a person's ears committing a crime, you can identify them.
Wow. Well, the yard, Scotland Yard used the ear identification before the fingerprint.
Before that. And I would challenge you, you may not want to see the show, or maybe you do, I don't know. On late night TV, one guy has the most distinctive ears of any person I've ever seen.
Stephen Colbert.
Stephen Colbert.
Oh, yeah. One ear is about halfway there.
Lopsided.
Of course, I have pretty distinctive ears myself. It's okay. But you say right and left are different?
Well, right and left are very similar on the same person.
Yeah.
Okay. If you went next to your neighbor, the most obvious is right here at the bottom. Because they'll separate or they'll stick to the neck. That's easy. Then you get more complicated.
Derek?
One of the things I love about Holmes' stories is that the observations about this human behavior, like when he said he got the lady, a lot of times people that live alone don't have a lot of company. If you'll talk to them just a little bit, they will open up and sing like a canary.
Yeah,
and just,
right.
Like a blue carbuncle, I think he made the bet with the guy. So I got more out of him making a bet with him, thinking he was going to win money than he ever would have if I just directly asked him stuff. So I love those little observations.
Yeah.
Did we talk about the why he sent the ears? Was he wanting to be caught, or was he just so out of his mind? I thought that was just, I thought maybe he wanted to be caught. He felt guilty about what he did.
He even set this up earlier in the story. I'm going to measure their ears if I catch it.
He wanted her to know who he was.
Oh, okay.
No, I think Browner had anger management issues in addition to the alcoholism.
He bashed a couple of people in the boat with him.
But he was not a sociopath, because otherwise he wouldn't have been so upset afterwards and written out that confession.
Yeah, right, that's true. Yeah. Tom?
I might add that all of these sites we talked about
Right.
are on the map. Cool. And in the book and on the map, in addition to listing the sites, I have their map coordinates. Now, if you've got Google Earth on your computer,
right.
you can enter that latitude and longitude notation that's in my book and on these text boxes that come up when you click on the map. You can put that in and it will zero in on that place and you can go in and see that site today, what it looks like.
Oh, yeah, with the Google, it shows you the street and then you go down the street or whatever.
Also, if you have the book of the map in London and you know where your hotel, you find that on the map, you'll see the sites that were in walking distance. You can enter the map coordinates and it will give you walking, the GPS program in your smartphone will give you walking instructions. It always knows where you are because of this device you've got in your hand.
Wow. There it is.
It will then give
There's
you
your
walking
story.
instructions, street by street, turn by turn. Also on the map.
There's your map.
Yeah. Also on the map, there are buttons on the side of the interactive map that will show you walking tours. Sherlock and Watson walking back to back Baskerville's home on Northumberland Hotel will be drawn, or Holmes or Watson going from his Strand Hotel to have lunch and then to meet Sherlock for the first time at St. Bart's. That's on there. There's a bunch of, go to the website, it's got a lot of it.
How many trips did you make to London to put this together?
Probably 30 or.
Wow,
35.
really?
Jim, will you share that?
Well,
Share the website?
I will. We'll send that to you in a chat box or something.
Mary Frances loves shopping.
SherlockLondon.com.
We both love theater. And we like the dining over there.
The cruising the Thames was the best.
And we cruise the Thames. Well, we did a lot of things. You can see all the books on Amazon. I use before I lost my eyesight, I published under Thomas Bruce Wheeler, and I've got several books on London. But anyway, if you're interested in actually visiting London electronically on your computer, go to the website and use these map coordinates to see what those places look like today. And sometimes I've included the way they looked in 1895. There's one other map that I recommend that's in the book. There's a program, a map site created by the Library of Scotland that will allow you to take a modern street map of any portion of London and overlay 1895 London buildings on it.
Okay.
The example in the book is the Turkish bath that Sherlock and Watson used on Northumberland. And you can see next door is a pub that at the time was called the Northumberland Arms, but today is the Sherlock Holmes.
Right.
Right. Anyway.
That's great.
If you go to the website, you'll got a lot of fun things you can do with it.
This has been recently done by the guy that's going to be the editor of the District Messenger. For 30 years, Nick Butekin was the editor of that. Then it went to Roger Johnson, who's a good friend of several of us here. He and Billy Fields were good pals. Roger and his wife, Jean Upton, who's an American person, they're in charge of keeping the Sherlock Holmes room at the Sherlock Holmes pub. They keep that updated and cleaned up, and and they take people on tours there. And so Jean became the editor of the District Messenger. This is the newsletter for the Sherlock Holmes Society of London, which is the second oldest society, the Baker Street Irregulars being the first one. And so the new editor is like some John Thomas Miller. I can't get that exactly right, but he has a new book It does exactly what your book does. I'm not sure that he has, it's clickable, but he does take you to every site in England, not just London, of every story. So it'd be an interesting way to follow up with what you've done, Tom.
Well, in one of the newsletters, Roger, they have an annual meeting, a big dinner, and usually it's the Houses of Parliament.
Right,
dining room
exactly.
At Westminster.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were people coming into London who didn't live there. And they reviewed my book in that newsletter.
Oh, really? Okay.
And they said, I'm gonna be immodest now,
Okay.
be prepared. They said, as a guide to the London of the canon, Tom Wheeler's book is unbeatable.
Wow. Okay.
Not, so usually you're looking for 5-star reviews, but I think unbeatable maybe a 6-star.
5 or
Yeah.
6, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Any other salient points to add to the story today? We've got a great crowd here, and we finally got our man here to give us the story. I'm getting pretty nervous about it. We're glad you made it. And John is going to have to replace our lost professors, Marino Alvarez and Vicky Risco, and then Dick Renfro. Was also a professor, so we need a professor in our group. We'd be glad to make you the Norwood builder. Tom, go ahead.
Oh, could you remind us of next month's event?
Okay, Dave Price, did we agree that we could come to your house on December the 9th?
That's correct.
Okay, do we need to bring anything?
Yeah, let's do it like we did last year, if everybody brings it. The way it was worded last year was a dessert or snack.
Okay.
So on the bachelor brought sacks of potato chips. We did have some nice dessert.
And we will send everybody the map on how to get there. It's straight out
Old Hickory.
Old Hickory Boulevard.
Not that far from here.
Not far from
That's
there.
true. That's
Fresh
right.
shot.
And it's gonna be at 11.
11, I think. So.
Yeah. We'll go with that. John, mark that down.
Putting it on our calendar.
Got my social secretary here taking care of me.
So it's bring some kind of dessert or a snack, but don't bring lunch. We're not doing a pot of soup or anything like that. And you're gonna have a bar that just won't quit, aren't you?
So true. Nobody, not but one guy had any alcohol last year.
Is that
I've
right?
got this wonderful bar there and nobody,
Oh, my God. Well,
I won't tell who.
anyway. Yes,
We have one late joiner.
we have something coming from the web that's here.
Well, no, I just want to point out, we have one late joiner and wanted to welcome, Elise. Am I saying that correctly? ALES?
Elias, is that you? He can't hear us.
Can you hear us?
Anyway,
Well,
I guess that's it. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks, folks.
Bye.
Thank you.
We're going to close the poem.
Oh, thank you for reminding me. I actually